Welcome to Talking Industrial Automation, a podcast where you get to know the people who make modern industrial automation possible. You will get to hear from CSIA system integrators and industry partners to get a better understanding of how they help their clients solve process challenges and how they've earned success in their careers. Along the way, we will touch on system integration best practices, technology, trends, and challenges. Whether you are a manufacturer, end user, supplier, or system integrator, you will enjoy the insights these industry professionals bring to this podcast. Let's get started. Hi, my name is Lisa Richter, the host of Talking Industrial Automation, a podcast where you get to know the people who make modern industrial automation and processing possible. In today's episode, we're talking industrial automation with Dino Busalachi, who is CTO and co-founder of Velta Technology, a company that provides digital safety as a service. Dino has close to 4 decades of global experience across information technology, engineering, and industrial control systems with multiple globally recognized brands, including Rockwell Automation, Anheuser-Busch, American Standard, and General Motors. Dino, welcome to the podcast.
Lisa, thanks for having me.
Let's start with maybe sort of easy one. And that is, how do you describe to lay people what it is that you do?
So we provide digital safety around connected physical systems, kinetic assets, right? The industrial control system world. So we provide mitigating and compensating controls to protect and provide digital safety around that environment. So Velta was formed specifically with that in mind. That's predominantly what we focus on. You'll hear a term called OT, operational technology. Operational technology describes pretty much everybody that has anything to do with running critical infrastructure facilities or manufacturing environments. So that's your plant management, that's your process control engineering teams, that is your operators, your QA people, anybody involved in making goods or producing services is OT. Everybody knows what IT is, which is the other side of the equation. IT has a role in regards to working with the OT environment predominantly, but at the end of the day, the OT folks are the ones that own those assets that are out there getting goods and services for that organization.
Tell me a little bit about the history of Velta. Like, how did it begin and how has it evolved over the years?
Well, it's really a culmination of, again, 4 decades of me working in this environment, right? And so just leading up to Velta, which is coming into its 5th year. Prior to that, I was working for Rockwell Automation in their network security services group. Prior to that, I was working in the Rockwell channel with distributors and system integrators. And then prior to that, I spent 20 years working for Anheuser-Busch in the engineering group and all the other manufacturers that you mentioned earlier that I've been involved with. So knowing that environment, knowing what is out in those manufacturing environments, which cover decades, right? I mean, in the OT world, industrial control systems life cycles are 10 and 20 and 30 years in some cases, right? It's not in a short life cycle like IT systems that are sometimes 3 to 5. What we're focused on is how do we put security around something that didn't have safety and security in mind when it was built. And so Velta was formed specifically with some of these new tool sets that were coming out that were geared for asset inventory, malware, vulnerabilities and exposures built for the control system arena. And there was a big gap, right? And recognizing that that gap was there that needed to be filled in this ecosystem of OT suppliers and vendors. We thought that this would be a really good fit in that space. So that's why we founded Velta, was specifically to go after that. There's a lot of good companies out there that have brought these tools forward, Cisco Systems being one. I mean, they've been in the industrial control system arena for quite some time, providing network connectivity types of technology, right? Their switching platform, their routing platform has been in the industrial environment for over 20 years. And so they saw the same issue because they're a big cybersecurity company and wanted to be relevant in this space and wanted to provide technology in there. So that's one of our key partners, along with some of the others that specialize in OT intrusion detection systems.
So tell me a little bit more about this specialization. Is there a specific industry or product or discipline, and why or why not?
Well, yeah, because the industrial arena is different from the IT arena from just availability, right? There are two priorities that you find in a manufacturing environment. Anybody with control systems, safety is always job one. Job two is unplanned, unscheduled downtime. You want to try to minimize that because it's very costly when you're not making goods, right? You got machines that aren't producing goods. You got people that are there that you're paying salaries. You got resources you're consuming, utilities. You got trucks waiting. You've got a whole bevy of activity where, the average discrete manufacturer, an hour of unplanned, unscheduled downtime costs them $50,000 an hour, right? Automotive industry is $20,000 to $25,000 a minute if they're not producing goods. So availability is always key for them right up front, not confidentiality like what IT would do when it came to an event. Where in the OT world, if there's something going on, one, you got to be safe. Two, if you're going to bring this equipment down, you got to do it in a safe manner. You don't want to destroy it. And you have to decide, do we really need to go down? And that's one of the biggest challenges that the OT people are starting to learn is these organizations are attacked. If you don't have visibility into your OT environment, you don't know if you're safe or not. Whereas IT can see what's going on in their world, right? They've got tools that are telling them we got malware and we know where it's going or where it's at and what it might be. But if you're not doing the same thing on the OT side, then you have no idea what's down there because IT's not watching that stuff. They don't know what's going on inside that PLC or necessarily or an HMI that might be still running Windows XP on it, or the engineering workstations or the drives that are out there, the robots. They have no idea what the status of any of that stuff is, safe or not. And if you're not paying attention to it, then the natural move is to shut down to be safe, right? Which is what we saw with Colonial Pipeline, right? They got attacked. It came in through the email systems. IT was getting hammered. They looked over to the OT guys, probably asked them, how are you doing over there? And they're like, I don't know. We're operating, but we don't know if we have malware. We can't see it. So they had to shut down to be safe. And we see that a lot. We're also seeing where insurance companies are coming in right now because they've gotten smarter over the last few years and recognizing it's like, yeah, I get this report from you about what you're doing to secure and protect your business systems, but you're a manufacturer. What are you doing on the plant floor side? What do you demonstrate to me what you're doing over there is the same you're doing over here? And there's a big gap when that happens. And all of a sudden they're not getting their cybersecurity insurance because they're not demonstrating that they're having reasonable duty of care in taking care of their control system environment. One of the questions we ask organizations when we engage during our tabletop exercises, are you applying the same amount of due diligence to protect and secure the control system environment as you are your enterprise? And if you're not, why aren't you doing that? But it's usually because of this relationship between IT and OT is not as well aligned and collaborative as many people think that it is. When you have a manufacturer that has 20, 30, 40, 50 or more plants in their fleet regionally, around the world, it's very difficult for a few people sitting in a corporate arena to try to determine what is it really going to take at the local level to protect and secure systems out there that they have no idea what they are or what they're doing or what stripe and what I mean by stripe is like the plant floor is littered with technology from all over the globe. IT standardizes on stuff. They standardize on a computing platform. They standardize on a networking platform. They standardize on an operating system and certain applications. In the OT world, it's all over the map. And you can find a 25 or a 35 or a 50 to 1 ratio difference between the number of OT/IoT assets in a manufacturing environment compared to how many IT assets you have. So for every one IT asset, there's 20 or 30 or 50 IoT or OT assets out there in the manufacturing arena. The machines are getting smarter. All the new machines you buy coming in are getting smarter. They want connectivity. Your third parties, your OEMs, and your system integrators that have warranty and support responsibility are wanting access in there. COVID kicked the door wide open for remote access into these environments. For those people that thought that they were air gapped, those days are gone. Digital transformation has changed that. Industry 4.0 has changed that. COVID changed that. And now we have all this access in and out of this environment, and we're not watching it or protecting it or have the wrong tools in place. A lot of the IT tools are incompatible for the industrial arena. They don't speak the same language, and their behaviors are different. And get into the behaviors of the industrial world, injecting additional traffic into a control system environment to try to learn about it is disruptive. Again, unplanned, unscheduled downtime. and you can shut down the plant floor. They do shut down the plant floor. IT doesn't necessarily know that they're doing it because for them, it's just their normal behavior on trying to discover assets that are out there connected in the environment to try to determine, do they need to be here? Do they belong here? And what are they? And what are they talking to? And what applications are running on? What protocols are they using? And so they're doing their due diligence, but that bleed over and trying to throw that onto the plant floor is very disruptive. So that's why these tools that came out that were geared for the industrial control system arena are passive in nature. They listen. They don't talk. Where on the IT tools, they're screaming down the wire. And if you got a PLC that's sitting there doing something that's very timely, that it can't be disrupted, maybe it's running a filler, filling 2,000 cans a minute, for example, distracting it causes jams and causes backups and causes a mess and shuts down my filler because IT wanted to scan the network. So their practices are different. They need to understand that, right? And there's a lot of people that do not understand that right now because the tools they buy, the practices that they deploy, then the vendors that sell them these technologies, they don't teach them any different on that, right? They just say, yeah, take my tool and go out there and scan and learn about everything you can in your environment, regardless of the asset type that's out there. It takes a different mindset and knowledge on how to work in that space.
It's wild to me to think about all the trade shows I went to back in the day where they were handing out USB drives with their content on it. And you think about it now, you're like, wow, it's such an unsafe practice that we considered kind of every day. But that's what brings to mind like how maybe complacent some people or companies get, that they just aren't thinking necessarily about the vulnerabilities and how easy somebody can guess a password or do something fairly simple to really break things.
Well, it's the perception that IT owns cybersecurity in the general sense. At the executive level, the C-suites, they would assume that, right? Why would they not assume that? They're the ones with the cybersecurity professionals. They're the ones with the budget. They're the ones with the tools. And OT is perfectly fine when you mentioned about cybersecurity to them. That's IT's job, right? So they want to deflect. They don't want that responsibility. But safety is everybody's responsibility. It's either everybody's responsibility or it's nobody's responsibility, depending on the type of organization you're working with. And what I would say is when you get into those discussions, they need to have that, right? There needs to be the three-legged stool, needs to be IT, the C-suite, and OT sitting down and having this conversation. Tabletop exercises are really good ways of getting those gaps up and on the table, right? Because we've been in a few where I like showing pictures of the plant floor, right? I like opening up the panels that house the PLCs and the drives and the network switches that are in there, maybe the HMIs that are on the door of the panel, and showing those, because that panel is a full-blown Windows computer that's running that packaging line, for example. Now, when you show those to the executives and even the IT, especially the CIO or the CISO, and they see that stuff and they're like, well, yeah, that's not in my purview. That's not my responsibility. Well, if it's not in your area of responsibility, then whose is it? Because the people that own those assets think that you're protecting them, number one. Or number two, they don't have the resources and money and time to go do the cybersecurity practices to mitigate and put in compensating controls around this stuff because they're not using these tools either. So the C-suite needs to see that and recognize that, right? And some of the insurance companies, like I said earlier, are starting to bring that to the table, right? Because now risk is involved because they're getting a letter from the insurance company saying, hey, we're not going to cover you because you're not fessing up on your OT side, right? And so it's starting to get on the table. You got regulations coming down. Critical infrastructure is getting a lot of pressure from the Department of Homeland Security, TSA, CISA, the EPA are starting to put regulations in these critical infrastructure groups, so asking them to do a better job of at least providing asset inventory and the state of those assets to them. And if you do get breached, you have to respond in with a period of time to let them know. And when you have local water municipalities that have no budget, have no people, it's a challenge. It really, really is a challenge out there. There's grants, there's all kinds of money that's available to them through the federal and state governments to help with training, to help with some of the tool selection, at least for them to get started, that they need to start taking a look at on how they can get some help in these critical infrastructure groups that are providing water, wastewater, and or power services to their community.
While the solutions to every challenge facing the industry today are not always clear, one thing is certain. A successful business must be bold as it tackles these changing times head on. The CSIA 2023 Executive Conference is just the place to be to explore these changes, opportunities, and solutions. With a carefully curated educational agenda, formal and informal networking opportunities, and an expo to showcase the latest innovations, the conference is built to bring you the resources you need to succeed. Plus, this year, CSIA is putting extra emphasis on bringing you 4 highly rated keynote speakers to ensure you walk away with actionable advice, thought-provoking ideas, and an energized attitude. And best of all, you'll do it in the iconic city of New Orleans. For more information, visit www.controlassist.org/conference 2023. See you May 15th through the 19th in the Big Easy.
So you mentioned Cisco earlier, but what are some of the other suppliers that you work with?
We work with Clarity, we work with Nozomi, we work with Vittorio, Fortinet, Stratus, Rockwell, Siemens. So we work with a lot of different vendors and suppliers in this particular space that are focused on OT. There is some integration from OT to IT with some of these tools, but it's the crawl, walk, run philosophy. And right now, everybody's still in that crawling phase, before you can get to the point where you're running, where you want to put intrusion prevention capabilities into your manufacturing environment. But you can only do that once you know what's really going on down there. Because again, you don't want to be disruptive. You don't want to break a connection or stop the comms from going on that could be disruptive in the manufacturing environment. It can be very costly. So you have to know specifically what's going on there, have it documented, and then be able to feed data to intrusion prevention systems that can intervene if something malicious happens or if there's some foreign connection into that environment that nobody understands, to be able to stop it without shutting down my plant floor.
So with all those suppliers, it must be kind of challenging making sure that your staff is up to date on the latest. So how do you address that?
We have a lab. We'd have labs that we run all of these technologies. We have PLCs and HMIs and a few other OT assets that we manage in our lab to bring these tools in to be able to test out this technology to see if it does what they say it's doing, or through their versioning as they go from one version to next, or patches that they apply that they actually didn't break something else, or not doing as they say that it would do. It's not providing the features and functionality. And so we go through that training. The other thing we do is all of our folks have to go to the field. Our analysts and our engineers have to do field work. They have to go and see these environments firsthand. And so we train, and quite frankly, the best success we've had right now, because this is such a new field, I can find a really good cybersecurity professional who really has, the chops to work with firewalls or EDR or, other security best practices, but they don't understand the industrial environment. In a lot of cases, they don't even want to work in the industrial environment, right? Because they're dangerous, they're dirty, they're not pretty, not everybody wants to work in a manufacturing environment, right? Because you got to wear the uniform, you got to wear the hard hat, the high vis vest, safety glasses, safety shoes, depending on what kind of vertical you're in, there's other safety measures that are involved. They don't like participating in that. So we've been having better success of going after industrial people, mainly folks that maybe got a vocation in engineering or have done some industrial work, and teaching them how to use these industrial intrusion detection, IT, cybersecurity tools in this space. I've found it's been easier to go that path than it is necessarily to find a seasoned 10-year veteran on the IT side. It's a heck of a cybersecurity professional. And then saying, oh, yeah, by the way, for the next 2 years, you're going to be trouncing around food and bev plants or steel plants or harvesting plants or paint plants, chemical plants, oil and gas, whatever it might be. That's where you're going to be working for the next couple of years, applying your trade. Some don't want to do that.
Too bougie.
Here to do it. If you get an industrial person, it's a double E, mechanical engineer, chemical engineer, you get one of those folks. They tend to gravitate to that industrial environment just fine.
So going back to your suppliers, are you certified or endorsed by any that you want to mention today?
Well, all of the ones that I mentioned, they all require levels of certification and training and continuing education with their technology. So in order to be a partner, you have to be able to go through the motions of taking their training programs, not only from just the business generally, but also the various technologies they provide, but then From a selling perspective, business development perspective, and also from the technical and engineering perspective, they require those types of certifications for you to be able to do business with them. So yeah, every one of them.
What would you say is unique about how you approach a project?
If you security frameworks, right? If you follow the NIST framework, for example, right, which is identify, detect, protect, respond, recover. And so when you think about the first tenet in that is identification. Identification is asset inventory, and not a snapshot in time, but it should be something that's continuously monitored. Because as soon as the team goes to the field and does an assessment of some sort, as soon as that team is done and leaves that plant, it's already invalid because things change. Plants are not static environments, right? There's things coming and going and things modified and changed in that environment every single day. So the goal, just like IT doesn't do assessments from the position of, I'm just going to do a snapshot to see what I have today. No, they're watching their stuff all the time. If you connect to their network or you have an IT asset, as soon as you connect into that environment, they're scanning your machine's reporting information to their security controls. They know their asset inventory. They got SBOMs on the machine, they have NAC, network access control, to determine whether you can connect based on certain criteria. There's a lot of checks and balances on that side of the fence. On the OT side, there's none of that. It just doesn't exist, not very well anyway. So again, it gets back to what I said earlier. You're practicing the same amount of due diligence to secure and protect the control system environment as you are the enterprise.
Going back a little bit more about the evolution of Velta, talk to me a little bit how it's changed or grown in the past year and what you expect for the next couple of years.
So services have come into play, right? Because a lot of companies, they outsource a lot of their IT support and technology, right? They rely on somebody else to do that for them. And we've recognized the same with these OT tools from a security perspective is that the organizations don't have the staffing or the resources to care and feed for this technology. You don't want it to become shelfware. And that's what we witnessed. That's how we came across maybe services would be something we should start thinking about adding into this mix as far as our portfolio. Because there's clients who bought these tools and they just sit. They're not using them to their fullest capability. And on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say even clients that have had these tools for a few years are still maybe at 2s and 3s in their capability and skill set, and they're not advancing. So services are definitely a big piece of it. The other thing we see going on is the OT ecosystem that supplies machine centers and industrial control systems are building practices because they recognize that they have to do a better job and be more rigorous in providing some type of mitigating, compensating cybersecurity controls in the machine centers that they provide. So just like they evolved over safety, physical safety, I'm going to build a robot that's going to pick boxes up off of the conveyor. Well, I got to put a cage around that robot so nobody just walks in there and gets whacked in the head with that robot swinging around picking up boxes, right? So you had to build a physical safety apparatus around that robot, but they're not doing it from a digital perspective. You did it from a physical perspective to make sure somebody doesn't stick their hand in a moving piece of equipment, right? So if you open up the gate, the machine stops versus before there was no gate. You could just reach in there and grab something, maybe you wanted to pull off of the line. So they've moved into that physical safety world of stopping that and putting those controls around. Well, now you have to do the same thing with the digital footprint of these things. You have to determine what are its weaknesses, what are its vulnerabilities and exposures, and metric that, know what it is, know what your path forward is to mitigate that or remediate that if you can. If you can't, what else can I do? Can I harden the network around it and create microsegmentation? Can I get traffic out of there that doesn't need to be in that environment or remove it? Do I change my remote access into this environment? So this is, some people think VPN is just the perfect way to get into the network, but it's not the right tool for the control system environment, right? There's different tools that were built for the control system environment. Again, provides better mitigating controls around that from a remote access standpoint compared to your team viewer or just your VPN connection that you're providing in. Like if I'm sitting at home and I VPN because I have access into the Anheuser-Busch network, well, how does anybody know that might be sitting on my home network would also have that access? You don't know if somebody's following in behind me and you can't see it because you granted me access. So I have access into that environment. A lot of clients have not done a very good job of tightening those controls down to determine time of access, role based on persona, based on time of day, based on machine center. If I get into this plant, can I see everything in the plant, or can I just see the machine centers I need to work on? Can you restrict me down to just the machine that I need to have access to? And even then, can you control what protocols and are you watching what I'm doing, and are you recording it so you have an audit record of this type of stuff? So if something happens later, you'll know what it was, exactly what I did while I was in there. IT wouldn't have any of that stuff for these clients. So again, the emphasis is OT has to step up and take the reins and own this environment. I have a saying, I want IT on the field. I want them in the huddle. They just can't quarterback this thing. They just can't. Because at the end of the day, they don't own those assets, number one, and they're not familiar with the processes that those things are doing, number two, right? IT's job is to help you manage your business. That's what they do. OT is the reason why you're in business. That's how you make your money, or provide the services and goods that you provide. So they need to work together. They need to get tighter aligned. But at the end of the day, OT still needs to own this, just like they do today. They are the fiefdom king of that control system environment in that manufacturing facility, bar none, because of safety and reducing unplanned and scheduled downtime. So if that plant's down, they're the ones that got to get it back up and running.
Hi, Brian.
Hey, Lisa.
Hey, tell the good people who you are and why you're here.
Sure. So my name is Brian Perozik, and I'm the Industrial Automation Segment Leader at Clayton McKirby. And I'm here to talk about the upcoming one-day workshop that's going to be taking place the day prior to the start of the CSIA conference.
What's the name of the workshop and who are the presenters?
It's called Investing in Your Most Important Asset, Your Company, Building and Realizing Business Value. So I will be presenting along with Clint Bundy of the Bundy Group and Kathy Durham of the Capital Valuation Group.
So who would you recommend attends this event, and what can they expect to learn?
You know, the workshop is really geared towards business owners and their leadership teams. It's really meant to help them understand the drivers that affect how prospective buyers would value their company. And by understanding that a bit better, we think that business owners will be able to learn how to use those drivers to strategically grow the value of their business.
Would you say this workshop is just for people who are planning their exit strategy?
No, absolutely not. And actually, you know, it really makes sense for SIs of every stage of the business life cycle to start thinking about this. You know, it's never too early to start thinking about the value of your business. I tend to use the example of Google Maps. You can't use an application like that unless you know where you want to go and where you're starting from. And then the app gives you the various alternatives. Do I want the fastest route, the most fuel efficient route, et cetera? The same applies to your business. You know, it's really hard to build the right strategy if you don't know where you want to end up.
Brian, can I be honest with you?
Of course.
It sounds a little intimidating. Is it? I mean, what can you say to people who might feel a little bit freaked out by all this stuff?
Yeah, no, I mean, I understand that can be a very overwhelming topic, but that's really the beauty of this workshop. Kathy, Clint, and myself, we've worked closely with various CSIA members, you know, and really understand this industry, what makes it unique, and the drivers that impact the value of your business. Our goal in this workshop is really to kind of bring that down to a level that you don't need to be a CPA or a certified valuation specialist or anything like that to understand. We're going to provide some examples and tools that are specific to the SI business and really put it in a format that participants will be able to utilize right away without any extra work.
All right, sign me up. Tell the people where they can go for more information.
Sure. They can visit www.controlsys.org/2023 Value Workshop.
Sounds good. See you there.
Can't wait.
From a business perspective, how is Velta road mapping or strategizing for the future going forward? What's your strategy to help this situation?
Training, right? Some of the things we've been doing, we started some training programs out that, and again, there's a lot of grant money available to organizations in the state of Missouri, for example. We're pursuing training programs that will allow any manufacturer, doesn't matter how small they are or how big they are, to have their folks attend at a minimum, at least the OT cybersecurity concepts, right? Just a small 3-day class to start getting people who work inside these manufacturing facilities some idea of what, it's like physical safety, they learn that, what digital safety looks like. How do you protect and secure your control systems. And what are the technologies that do that? What do they look like? What do those processes look like, right? What does that reporting look like to get them up to speed on it, right? And these companies can send them to training for free. We're also working with companies that specialize in training cybersecurity professionals and adding OT into their roadmap of training for these students. Even at the university level, we're not really seeing tracks around OT cybersecurity, right? I mean, cybersecurity is a big word, right? It's a boil the ocean kind of term. And so when you mention that to somebody, depending on their background and their knowledge or lack thereof, they don't know what they don't know. So when you start talking about OT, industrial control systems, that's a niche. That's a specialization. It says, okay, Rockwell, Siemens, Honeywell, Emerson, GE, ABB, take your pick of these automation technology vendors that provide these connected physical systems, having the knowledge of what those things are, the SCADA systems and the DCS systems that control them, right? The networks that they run on and how they operate and what makes them unique, the protocols that make them unique is stuff that's all got to be learned. We got to start teaching a whole new group of cybersecurity professionals in this space. And Velta's committed to doing that. Just like we did the network. I've been around long enough by the gray hairs. If you go back to the late 80s and early 90s, when the internet was starting to explode and all these organizations wanted to get on the internet and move away from just mail and chat and file transfer, which is what the internet originally was doing, compared to what it morphed into with commerce and your brand and recognition and all of the other things that social media, of course, that we've gone through for the last 20 plus years. We didn't have people out there designing and building networks back in the early 90s and 80s either, not at the enterprise class level we have today. When you think about a data center or cloud or campus or wide area networks, those IT networking professionals back in 1988 and 89, there wasn't a whole lot of them either. It took a long time to build, a decade or more. I mean, look at Cisco Systems and what they morphed and grew into out of that era for a company that started in the mid 80s. And by the early 90s, the juggernaut they were becoming. But they still needed people to go and design and build and architect and the analysts to go put these networks in of that size and scope. It's the same challenge we're seeing today in cybersecurity. There's millions and millions of jobs available around the world today. There's no way we can fill those jobs at this stage. So we have to begin somewhere, and we have to start working in the plants and start training the people at the plant level, right? Think globally, act locally, because this is a local issue that they need to start taking control of, just like they do physical safety at their location. If you have hazardous materials, there's people on staff that have other jobs, but they might also be the hazmat person you go to talk about how do I receive or ship hazardous materials that I've got. And they know the plans and the procedures to be able to do that, right? And what it takes to do that. How do you hold those chemicals? What kind of container do you got to put them in? How do you label them? What shippers companies are allowed to pick this stuff up and handle it? All of those things, right? And so you had to teach the plant locally on how to do that. It's the same thing with this stuff. When it comes to OT cybersecurity, the local plant has to have the knowledge and the tools and understanding of what's going on inside that environment from a digital perspective. Physically, they get it. They got locks on the doors, they got lights, they got gates, right? They got all these other SOPs in place to be safe. Now these things, we're going to have to develop and do the same thing from a cybersecurity perspective for industrial control systems.
Sounds like you've got a lot of educating to do around the end user community.
We do. We really, really do.
How should a customer go about choosing a system integrator?
Experience would be good. Reference and practice, demonstrated practitioners. We look at ourselves as practitioners. And what I mean by that versus consulting, and we do consulting, kind of talking on both sides of my mouth, but as a practitioner, we actually work in the plant floor. We know the control system when we see it, and we know what it does. If I go out on the plant floor with my team and go hunting, and what I mean by that is we go out and we put in a tool like Clarity, for example, and maybe we're doing a pilot or a proof of value for this customer. So we go out and we look at their environment. I can tell a lot by just the hygiene in the environment, on how well they take care of their environment, the age of it, is it 30 years old? Is it 5 years old? We walk through the plant, put the tool in, start discovering, looking for assets, building a baseline. And then we walk the plant to see what's missing from the baseline. If I'm looking for the generators, for example, that are in the backside of the plant that are used as power backup, I'm not seeing them in the baseline of the tool. So what's it going to take to get those in there, right? Is it just because of the way the network is set up? Is there a tweak, or is it really air gapped, or is it just that it's air gapped and it's connected to something else? And we just need to get into the stream of that conversation in order to get that machine learning baseline over into the tool. That's one of the strengths that we bring to the table, right? And then the ability to manage and service this stuff and what it takes to do that. Because when we turn these tools on, it's like somebody pointing a fire hose at your head. You got all this new data flying up and out of the plant. Remember what I said, 20, 25, 30, 40 to 1 ratio of difference of IoT, OT assets to IT assets. And all of a sudden, you got all these assets firing up and providing information about who they are, what they are, who they're talking to. Here's my weaknesses, my vulnerabilities and exposures that I have on my firmware or my software that I have. Here's where I sit in the network. And then you have to start making sense of all that stuff. How do I start commissioning and localizing this traffic? So if I use a brewery as an example, I have brewing, I have packaging, I have utilities. Well, the guys in brewing don't care what's going on in packaging. They only care what's going on in brewing. Well, let's set the tool up and design it so that they're only looking at the stuff that they care about, the things that interact with their control systems as they're making beer. Same thing with the packaging guys, same thing with the guys in utilities or the warehouse. So that's one of the other strengths that we have. Most of the consulting groups wouldn't even know how to begin to do that, right? Because you'd have to really break it down by process, cell, zone, line, area, and set the tool up and configure it to work as that environment operates and how it works.
What are some other trends and challenges you're seeing in industrial automation right now?
They all want to try to get data up and off that plant floor, right? How can I make more with less? How can I be more efficient? How can I be of, I don't know, the right terminology in regards to how do I fit into the community as far as being a good steward? I mean, we've seen some pretty nasty stuff going on here recently, right? We had a chocolate plant that blew up a couple of weeks ago. We've had trains falling off the tracks. Manufacturers are struggling, right? Dole recently got hit. We know others that, and not everybody tells you. Everybody's been hit, I think. They just either don't know it or they don't want to disclose it, right? There's a lot of clients out there that don't want to say what's happened to them and the hundreds of millions of dollars in brand and loss that they've suffered because of being attacked. And so when I think about that piece of it, it's like, what are you doing to get better? Can you be better this year than you were last year? And you can be better next year than you were this year, right? What is your plan? And are you developing that plan? And is it measurable? We created what we call a connected device index. And what it does is it allows you to take a look at all of your OT assets, vulnerabilities, and exposures that are listed, either by the vendors themselves, Microsoft, NIST, CISA. And these are bulletins that are published. Everybody knows what Patch Tuesday is with Microsoft, right? Every Tuesday, Microsoft pushes out their patches, and you can take them or not take them. The plant floor is notorious for not patching because it's disruptive. Again, unplanned, unscheduled downtime. I take this patch, it could break my app, or I got to take my machine down long enough to take that patch, and I don't want to do that, right? I got Windows XP machines. I can't get patches anyway, right, at this stage of the game. So when you think about it in that context, our CDVI index allows you to see where you are. And then back in time, the vulnerabilities that became available, and you can build on it so you can at least have a snapshot in real time of your current vulnerabilities. And then as you go through time, am I getting better? What am I doing to bring that down, right? Think of it as a FICO score, just like your FICO score on your credit. You got a credit rating out there. Banks decide on what they're going to lend you based on that, right? Well, you can have an index on your OT assets to tell you the same thing. IT has it, right? IT can pretty quickly pull up and look at all the IT assets that they have and what their patch levels are and when they were patched, right? Because that's what IT does. They patch. That's what they do, right? They take advantage. As soon as those things come out, they push them out there. In the OT world, that doesn't happen. That's a big difference between those two groups. So then you got to develop those compensating, mitigating controls for them to determine how they can better protect themselves. Because if that's not their behavior, then what else can I do? And there are other things they can do, but they have to explore those, but they have to know where they are first. You can't just say, yeah, we don't patch. Well, how bad are you? I mean, really, how bad are you? They don't know.
In your opinion, what is the biggest challenge facing the automation marketplace for the future?
I think same thing with everybody's resources, plain and simple, people, technology, and processes. But people is probably one of the biggest ones that I see out there is finding talent at every level. That to me is probably the biggest challenge that I see is that. Cybersecurity is big. And so organizations need to determine that's one of their top priorities. I think if you talk to most executives in any organization, cybersecurity is going to be in the top 3 of challenges and things that keep them up at night, or they're concerned to their organization is what can happen to them. Because it's devastating, when it happens, it's painful. I've seen the look on the faces of the executives that have been hacked, and it just sucks the air right out of the room on them, and they're bewildered.
What are your predictions on the supply chain? You see that easing up soon, or what's your guess on that?
Well, it's gotten better. I know that, take Cisco Systems, for example, they had some really long lead times on equipment that they were supplying on the industrial arena, which is where it's close to me. And, when you've got 250 plus days that you're waiting for equipment that you've ordered, to make it, is a hit to the supply chain. And what I see is more onshoring coming, right? So that's another thing COVID taught us, plus a few other events that are going on in the world is, as a nation, you have to be able to make the goods and services that your nation needs to be productive and to thrive. And so we've recognized that some things that are really critical are in other places of the world. And now there's conflict. And the Ukraine-Russian war going on right now is allowing a lot more of the cybersecurity practices and attacks to be deployed in that arena. I've seen where some would say that, why haven't we seen a bigger threat here? And the issue is, in my view, is you got the United States government. Biden himself would say, that's attacking critical infrastructure. I don't know if I'd call it an act of war, but it's pretty damn close to it. It caused conflict. It would definitely raise that up. Going after rail, going after water, power, anything along those lines to disrupt the nation. If you're a nation state and you're doing that, that's no different than dropping a bomb in this country. The reaction to that would be swift and hard, and it'd be brutal. So I think that's what keeps a lot of people at bay potentially from doing some of that stuff. But that doesn't mean that they're not practicing around the world, because we see that every day. Every single day, there's some event that's happening. And again, a lot of it you just don't even hear about, because organizations do not have to tell anybody that they've been hacked. I think the government would like to change that. And they will if you're in critical infrastructure, you have to. But if you're just making beer, you don't say anything if you get hacked.
So let's move on to something a little lighter. What's the best advice you could give your younger self just getting started?
I don't know, maybe pick a different field. Maybe I should have been a doctor or maybe an accountant or something, but no. I don't know if I would change anything that I've done in my travels, to be honest with you. When I came out of school, I started working in the banking industry in the early 80s in data center. And from there, jumped into networking with putting on ATMs and building data center networks for these banks that were providing services for other banks, which is how I ended up working for General Motors, was through an EDS acquisition and merger with Ross Perot's company. And that's how I got into General Motors. And then from there, American Standard trained Monsanto, and then landed at Anheuser-Busch for 20 years working in engineering there, and then into the Rockwell thing.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Talking Industrial Automation. If you are interested in learning more about Dino or Velta, you can find them on the Industrial Automation Exchange at www.csiexchange.com. Thanks for listening, and thank you, Dino, for joining me today.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also help others find us by leaving a 5-star review and sharing your favorite episodes with colleagues. Thanks for listening to the Talking Industrial Automation podcast. Thanks also to bensound.com and Wistia for the music bumpers. Until next time.